In the heart of a land where knowledge and mysticism blended under the shadows of ancient mosques and bustling bazaars, a child was born. He came into the world not with the cries of royalty or the expectations of prophecy, but with the quiet soul of a thinker. The year was 980 AD, and the place was a small village near Bokhara in present-day Uzbekistan. The boy was named Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Abdullah ibn Sina. The world would one day call him Ibn Sina, and the West would know him as Avicenna. From an early age, it was clear that this child was not like others. He learned to read and write faster than anyone had seen. His mind was a vast desert where seeds of knowledge would bloom into entire gardens of thought. By the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran. Not just memorized it, but understood it, pondered its meaning, questioned its verses. His father, a respected scholar himself, encouraged him to pursue more. He brought in tutors from all over the region, men of science, philosophy, mathematics. Yet one by one, these men would leave, not because the boy was troublesome, but because they had nothing left to teach him. By the age of 16, Ibn Sina was already treating the sick. In a time when most of the world relied on herbs, prayers, and hope, Ibn Sina relied on reason. He observed the symptoms, traced their origins, and tested remedies. His mind worked like a machine, breaking down the complex and simplifying the mysterious. People traveled from distant lands just to see him, some even disguising themselves so no one would know they had come to a boy for healing. His fame grew when he cured a powerful sultan of an illness that none of the royal physicians could understand. It wasn't magic. It wasn't divine intervention. It was the application of logic, the calm hand of observation, and the dedication of a mind not bound by tradition. But his journey was not one of ease. With wisdom came enemies. In a time when scholars were revered but also feared, Ibn Sina walked a tightrope. The religious authorities often looked at him with suspicion. He spoke of the body not as a vessel for spirits, but as a system of organs and fluids. He dared to suggest that illness was not a punishment from the heavens, but an imbalance within the human body. This kind of thinking was dangerous. And yet, he never stopped. He wrote, he traveled, he taught. His curiosity was endless. He studied not only medicine but astronomy, music, mathematics, chemistry, and logic. He believed that to understand one thing fully, you must understand everything it connects to. For Ibn Sina, the world was not divided into subjects. It was one giant question begging for answers. His nights were long and silent. He often wrote by candlelight, his eyes strained but his hands steady. In one of those nights, he began penning what would become his most famous work, Al-Canon fi al-Tib, known in the West as the Canon of Medicine. This book would go on to shape the future of medicine not for decades, but for centuries. In its pages, he laid down the principles of diagnosis, described diseases with precision, and offered treatments based on reason rather than ritual. He described the contagious nature of some illnesses long before bacteria or viruses were understood. He spoke of the psychological impact of emotion on health when others dismissed the mind as separate from the body. This was not just a book. It was a revolution. It became the standard medical textbook in many parts of Europe and the Islamic world. For nearly 600 years, in a world divided by empires and faiths, this book was a bridge. It spoke a language all humans understood, the language of healing. But even as he wrote about the body, Ibn Sina was tormented by the soul. He believed in God, deeply so, but his understanding was built on both faith and reason. He debated philosophers, wrestled with Greek texts, and tried to reconcile the revelations of religion with the discoveries of science. For Ibn Sina, truth was not found in one or the other. It was found in the courage to seek it, no matter where it led. And so, the boy from Bokhara became the doctor of the world. But his story was far from over. Years passed, and the world around Ibn Sina changed. Empires rose and fell, rulers came and went, but he remained constant, a traveler with a pen in one hand and questions in the other. He was no longer just a healer. He had become a symbol of reason in an age still tangled in superstition. But that symbol came at a cost. Jealousy followed him like a shadow. Powerful men admired his intellect, but feared his influence. He was arrested, exiled, brought into courts only to be cast. out again, and yet he never stopped writing. In every prison cell, in every dusty corner of a foreign land, he wrote. Some of his greatest works were penned not in the silence of libraries, but in the cold, damp corners of confinement. He was often sick himself, weak from travel, starved by poverty, but his mind remained fertile. He once said that knowledge was more nourishing than food and more warming than fire. For him, learning was not a luxury. It was life itself that he moved from one city to another, sometimes as a guest of kings, sometimes as a fugitive. In Hamadan, he served as a vizier, a role that combined political leadership and scholarly responsibility. But power did not corrupt him. He used it to spread learning, to build hospitals, and to educate the young. He believed that a mind left idle was a candle never lit, and he lit as many as he could. His relationships were complex. He was respected, even adored, by his students, but misunderstood by many in authority. People could not understand a man who quoted Aristotle and wrote poetry, who spoke of the heavens like a philosopher but dissected the human body like a scientist. He was one of the rare minds that could live in two worlds at once, the world of logic and the world of spirit. And in doing so, he became a bridge between the East and the West, between science and religion, between ancient wisdom and future discovery. But inside him, the weight of his mind and the loneliness of genius began to grow heavier. He once confessed in his writings that knowledge without companionship was a burden. Though surrounded by followers and students, he often walked alone. His thoughts were too vast, his questions too deep for ordinary conversation. He suffered from chronic illness. In his later years, some say it was colic, others believe it was a disease unknown at the time. He diagnosed himself, tried various treatments, and even experimented on his own body. It was not out of desperation, but out of curiosity. He wanted to understand pain, to see what the body does when it begins to fail. For a man who had cured thousands, healing himself proved to be the greatest mystery. Even in illness, he wrote about the connection between the heart and the mind, about how grief can weaken the body, and how hope can extend life. He taught that a physician should not only heal the flesh, but also understand the soul. For Ibn Sina, a doctor was not just a technician of the body, but a guardian of human dignity. He believed that health was a balance, not only of physical elements, but also of emotions, environment, and spirit. The Canon of Medicine continued to grow, revised, and expanded, touching on hundreds of diseases, treatments, and theories. He introduced new methods of testing, new ideas about anatomy, and emphasized the importance of hygiene and mental well-being centuries before these became standard. And he didn't stop there. His writings on metaphysics, logic, and philosophy were equally influential. He proposed the existence of a necessary being, a force that caused all other things to exist, a concept that influenced not just Islamic thought, but Christian and Jewish theology as well. He challenged the works of Aristotle, improved upon the theories of Galen, and created a framework that would influence scholars for generations. But the world he lived in was not always kind to dreamers. As he aged, war and chaos surrounded him. The libraries he helped build were burned. Some of his books were lost to looters and flames. But what he had already shared with the world could not be destroyed. In the final year of his life, knowing that his time was short, he began to recite poetry again, something he had abandoned in the noise of politics and philosophy. His verses were filled with longing, not for fame, not for immortality, but for peace. He wrote of stars and silence, of wounds that never healed, and of wisdom that few would ever fully understand. And then, quietly, with no grand ceremony or final speech, he passed away in the city of Hamadan in the year 1037. He was just 57 years old, but his death was not an end. It was the turning of a page in a book that would be read for centuries. Time moved on, and the winds of history continued to reshape the world. Empires that once stood mighty crumbled into dust, and new names rose in the pages of power. But the name of Ibn Sina never faded. His legacy, like an unextinguished flame, burned quietly in the halls of medicine, in the minds of philosophers, and in the dusty corners of ancient libraries. Long after his passing, his books were translated into Latin and spread across Europe. The Canon of Medicine became a cornerstone of medical education in both the East and the West. Universities in Paris, Bologna, and Montpellier taught his theories for over 600 years. For many, he was not just a physician, he was the physician, the standard by which all others were measured. In a world that was still learning to wash wounds, Ibn Sina had already explained how disease spreads, how emotions affect health, how the human body could be studied, and most importantly, understood. But his impact wasn't limited to medicine alone. In philosophy, he helped shape the thinking of great minds like Thomas Aquinas and Maimonides. His writings on metaphysics influenced entire schools of thought. He argued for the harmony between faith and reason, showing that belief in the divine did not mean rejecting logic, and that seeking knowledge was a form of worship. Centuries after his death, when the Renaissance began to awaken Europe from its long slumber, the seeds of that awakening could be traced back to minds like Ibn Sina's, minds that dared to ask, dared to doubt, dared to explore. He was a man from the Islamic Golden Age, but his ideas belonged to humanity as a whole. East and West, Christian and Muslim, philosopher and physician, all found value in his words. Even in the modern world, echoes of his work still exist. His understanding of psychosomatic illness, where mental states can lead to physical symptoms, was far ahead of his time. His insistence on the importance of hygiene, clean water, and healthy food laid the groundwork for modern public health. His holistic approach to healing, caring for both body and soul, is being rediscovered today in medical practices around the world. Statues have been raised in his honor, museums bear his name, and his portrait has appeared on currency. But more than monuments, it is his legacy of thought that lives on. Every time a doctor diagnoses a disease using observation and reasoning, every time a student opens a medical textbook, every time a philosopher debates the nature of existence, Ibn Sina is present, but his story is not just about science or medicine. It is about what it means to be human. In a world torn by fear, ignorance, and division, he chose knowledge. In times of war and exile, he chose to write. When misunderstood and condemned, he chose to heal. His life reminds us that the pursuit of truth often comes with suffering, but also with purpose. That a mind dedicated to wisdom can outlast kings and kingdoms. And that even in silence, knowledge speaks across the centuries. Perhaps the most profound lesson from his life is this: that greatness is not in power, but in persistence, not in wealth, but in wisdom, not in the noise of fame, but in the quiet of understanding. Ibn Sina was born in a modest home, lived through war, illness, and exile, and died young. Yet in just 57 years, he changed the course of human history. He never claimed to be a prophet. He never demanded worship. He was simply a man with a question, and the courage to seek an answer. 1,000 years may have passed, but his light has not dimmed. It shines in the heart of every curious child, in the work of every devoted doctor, in the mind of every seeker of truth. He was the first doctor of the world, not because he was the first to treat illness, but because he was the first to treat knowledge as a cure, and that cure still heals us today.